What's going on, everybody? I'm getting a pretty busy weekend this weekend. So I've got a publication I just got today, and it's called Prison Legal News. It's written by the Human Rights Defense Center. I've done some volunteer work for them, and the editor is a guy named Alex Friedman, and he went to prison himself. A lot of people that work at Prison Legal News have been to prison themselves. It's a function of the Human Rights Defense Center, and they're a very good publication. I remember when I was in prison, I used to get, I didn't pay for it because I didn't have the money to pay for something like this. It was kind of like a luxury, but I did see them laying around, the library, the law library, what have you, and I read them, and they continue to have good cases in there. My job as a legal aid, it was important to keep abreast of different cases that may have came out, or lawsuits that may have came, things like that. So going through the one from October, for the current one of this year, there's a case that jumped out at me, and I wanted to talk about it. It relates to a video that I've talked about before. It's the one entitled Food. So let's see, get my bearings here. Back in 2014, it says specifically on January 13th, 2014, a person, his name was James Kenneth Embry. He was 57. He was serving a sentence of 9 years for drugs, nonviolent drug type offenses at a prison in West Kentucky. It's called Eddyville. It's the maximum security. It's the only penitentiary in the state, so it's a maximum security level facility. Have a very small population there. I've never been there myself, but publicly available information. It's one of the smallest prisons in the state of Kentucky, population-wise, people-wise. So a lot of the times, the people that are there are either on death row, or they tend to have conflicts with people. They've gotten into a lot of fights. They've assaulted officers, or they've decided to seek protective custody, and that's a protective custody facility. So at any rate, just to characterize the facility we're talking about, it's Eddyville. It's in western Kentucky, close to Illinois and off in that area. So there's this guy. His name was James Kenneth Embry. He was 57. He died of starvation and dehydration. I want to say that again. He died of starvation and dehydration. Those are very horrible ways to die, both, and he died of both. He had some mental illness issues, and the facility knew about that, prison knew about that. The medical staff knew about that, and so did the psychological staff. They knew about that as well. So I think I've talked about in a previous video about food and about one of the doctors that was named in this case. She was the supervising psychologist over the facility at the time, and the court felt, had some part to do with his death. So he decided to go on a hunger strike. At the time, Kentucky did not have a hunger strike policy, which is kind of strange in a prison context, because prisoners, a lot of times you hear about it like political prisoners, or if they're taking a stand against a condition in a prison, they'll go on a hunger strike. They'll threaten to, and that'll get mixed results. They may get some traction in that, or they may get nothing at all and just get locked up even further. So this individual went on a hunger strike. I don't think it was for political reasons. He was just that ill mentally. Decided to go on a hunger strike. The headline of this article, and it's on page 15 of the October 2020 of Prison Legal News. Try to get that in there. It says $400,000 settlement in lawsuit over Kentucky prisoner starvation death. So, you can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water is the general rule that I was taught when I was an EMT. For survival purposes, for ability to function purposes, you can go three days without water before you die, and 3 weeks without food. An important note I'm looking at, and I'll put the link for this down in the description, but it's a corrections policy and procedure chart for Kentucky. and it shows corrections policy number 13.14. And the title of the policy is called Hunger Strike, and it's a secured policy, which means that corrections is keeping it secret, public, kept from the public. I'm not sure when they secured that, but I know for a fact that I've seen that policy. As a legal aid, we had the policies in our at our disposal because we had to be able to use those for different reasons, to know and to tell other inmates about. So, from my recollection of reading the policy and having read it, it says that anytime an inmate either threatens to go, says the words hunger strike, or if through the course of them tracking him and tracking his intake and output, if he has, I think it said 3 days or one whole day of meals that he doesn't eat, then they consider him to effectively be on a hunger strike. And there's some things they can do with that policy, things like forced nutrition, feeding tube, those kinds of things. $400,000. I'm going to read the part of the suit here. Get this back a little bit so you can see me a little better. All right. So it says, I'm just going to restate kind of in here. He'd asked to be placed in segregation 5 weeks earlier, saying that he feared for his safety, according to WDRB. WDRB is a local news station here in Louisville, but they report on things that happen throughout the state. According to records filed from the lawsuit in 2016, he had a long history of mental illness. Despite this, Kentucky State Penitentiary medical staff from CorrectCare-Integrated Health in Kentucky, that I talked about that in another video, I believe, about healthcare and about medicine and how that works. And if I haven't, then I will. Corrections is notoriously horrible, and I don't want to characterize all of them as bad, but they're notoriously horrible for having stuff happen and not being the greatest and not being the most caring. So he had a long history of illness. This company used to be called CCS, then it used to be called Horizon Medical. They've changed their name again, apparently. Correct Care Solutions. It's all the same thing. It's just a different name. Medical and security staff decided that he must owe money, and the fear of the people he owed caused him to ask to be placed into segregation. That happens. It's called checking in, protective custody, whatever you want to call it. When he repeatedly asked to be placed back on his medications because he was feeling, quote, anxious and paranoid, they ignored his requests. Because I'm reading this verbatim from the article here, and I have no reason to doubt their reporting. They decided he was just angling for a change in housing, which when he stopped accepting meals. This was despite the fact that he was told that he wanted to hurt himself, banged his head on the wall on the cell door, and said he didn't have anything to live for. This guy was in there for he had a 9-year sentence, and he had went through, I think it was about 4 years of that sentence. So he was on the trail end of being done. He was an older guy. I'm not sure what his record was before that, but the way Kentucky's sentence structure is set up, he would have been out within a couple of years. A couple of years seems a long time, and it is. But he had a 9-year sentence. It was for nonviolent drug crimes, and he never made it home. So medical personnel refused to provide mental health treatment. Security personnel repeatedly wrote him up for refusing at least 4 consecutive meals, twice placed him in a restraint chair, pepper sprayed him for scratching himself on the wrist with a plastic utensil. No one tried to help him as his psychotic state intensified. Internal investigation by the Department of Corrections determined that his death occurred as a result of a systemic failure in the Kentucky State Penitentiary involving many interacting issues, which included medical and security personnel scheduling their rounds for extremely early hours, walking their rounds without actually going into the area of the cells, the living area. They cited numerous other things here. So let me get to the heart of it here. His 2 surviving sons and his daughter filed a civil rights lawsuit under Title 42 USC 1983, which is deprivation of civil rights under law there, against the company's people, the personnel there, individually, and the state police, the state reformatories, State Penitentiary's staff, violations of his civil rights and various state torts. They're represented by a Tulsa law firm, kind of going through it. The $400,000 settlement paid by the Department of Corrections, that's the state, that's the people of Kentucky. The people of Kentucky paid this lawsuit. People always hear about a government agency, paying a lawsuit. Well, that's good, but it's not their money to pay. And I feel about this that this never should have happened. The lawsuit, the settlement was reached in March 2019, but didn't become public until WDRB reported it on February 17th of 2020. So, nearly a year, almost a year later is when it became public. They admitted, reportedly also settled. It's part of the lawsuit. Details are not available under the state's open records law. Kentucky has an open records law that allows people to get a lot of things. This wasn't included, apparently. Prison staff involved in the case no longer work for the Department of Corrections. One contract medical employee had his access to DOC institutions revoked, and then the state penitentiary currently contracts with WellPath for prisoner health care. The case citation for this is Burke versus CorrectCare-Integrated Health, U.S. District Court, Western District, Kentucky, case number 5:15, TAC CV, TAC 00007, TAC TBR. So you can find that in the October 2020 edition of Prison Legal News. It's one of my favorite publications. They're honest. They do have some sort of a bias, I think, because it is a publication written by ex-prisoners, but they do have fair reporting, and it is honest reporting. I want to talk about that, and that's one case of many where a whole system turned its back and someone died. Granted, this man had mental illness, but it didn't mean that he deserved a death sentence. It didn't mean that he deserved to die of starvation and dehydration. Those are horrible, horrible ways to die, and it could have been prevented. One of the psychologists that I saw when I was in prison was one that was involved in that case. And there was, from what I read from earlier things, there was a mix-up about who was actually responsible, whether it was medical or the psych department. They kind of passed the buck and didn't really care, I think, about what happened to him, and then he died. Maybe they didn't take it seriously enough. And again, I'm not sure if licenses were revoked as far as their medical license or ability to practice in this state or somewhere else, but that would certainly go along with it. So if you have relatives that are in prison, know that things like this can happen, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that your relative exists and trying to advocate when they get in situations that for them, because he screwed up. He had some drugs. Drugs are legal. We know that, but it doesn't mean that he deserved to die and die that way. It's horrible. Shame on you, Department of Corrections, and shame on those people that had a direct role in his death. And I think they should have been charged criminally, because they just didn't care. They just, oh well, old man's crazy. He's not one to eat, so what? So that's all I've got. If you have any questions or comments, put them down below. Thanks.